If you have two sentences that aren't getting along, make one of the sentences serve the other one. It's called subordination. Let's get that right. The last few episodes, we've talked about different ways to combine sentences so that the relationship between the sentences makes sense. We talked about using a comma plus coordinating conjunction to smoothly combine sentences. And we talked about using a semicolon or a colon when two sentences have a special relationship. Today we'll learn how to have one sentence serve another through a technique called subordination. Let's start with a simple example of subordination. I got a ticket. I was speeding. As is, the sentences seem to almost be fighting each other for space in your mind. So let's signal that one sentence is really serving the other. Which of these two sentences is serving the other one? That's right. I was speeding tells you the cause of why I got the ticket. So, which subordinating conjunction from this list would signal the correct relationship? That's right, because. So our new sentence reads, I got a ticket because I was speeding. Because implies the second sentence caused the first one. So why isn't this word group considered a run-on? Isn't it joining two sentences without punctuation? No, because we no longer have two independent clauses. Because of the subordinating conjunction, the second clause no longer has a complete thought, and it is what's called a subordinate or dependent clause. And it makes perfect sense to smoothly run an independent clause into a subordinate clause that serves it. Let's look at some others. My kids love each other. They don't always show it. Okay, that's kind of awkward. Which sentence should we have serve the other one? The second sentence supplies some additional information for the first one. So, which subordinating conjunction from this list would best help signal the relationship between these two sentences? That's right, even though. Our new sentence reads, my kids love each other even though they don't always show it. Again, why is this not a run-on? Aren't we combining two sentences without punctuation? No, the first word group is still an independent clause. It has a subject, verb, and complete thought. But because of the subordinating conjunction, the second word group no longer has a complete thought. It is a subordinate or dependent clause, and it's perfectly okay to run an independent clause and a subordinate clause together. Here's a more difficult one. The researchers noted increased soybean production. They added the ammonium sulfate to the soil. The truth is, many subordinated conjunctions would work in this case. But what if I wanted to show time sequence? That one thing happened at one time, another thing at another time. Which subordinating conjunction would show a time sequence relationship? Yeah, after or when. The researchers noted increased soybean production after they added the ammonium sulfate to the soil. Again, not a run-on because we have an independent clause plus a subordinate or dependent clause. You try this next one. I will give you two sentences and you pick the best subordinating conjunction to smoothly combine them. Nurses served our community courageously. The COVID-19 virus struck. Let's try another more complicated one. My client has made progress. She recognized she exhibited all the signs of borderline personality disorder. What about punctuation? Notice in our first three examples that there's no punctuation needed between the independent clause and the subordinate clause. But generally, if you take the subordinate clause and place it first, You now have a pause, and a pause is a cause for punctuation. What punctuation mark would work well when you begin a sentence with a subordinating clause? That's right, a comma, because a comma works inside of a sentence to say, pause a second, and now I'm going to complete the thought. So let's summarize. If you have two sentences that seem to almost be fighting one another, make one sentence serve the other by using a subordinating conjunction, turning the second sentence into a subordinate clause. When the subordinate clause comes second, you usually do not need a comma. However, if you place the subordinate clause first, then usually you'll want to place a comma after it. All right, now time for a new part of our video called Yes, super challenging problem here. We've talked about coordination, where you use a comma plus coordinating conjunction to smoothly combine two sentences. And now today we've talked about subordination, where you use a subordinate clause to make one sentence serve the other. Did you know you can use coordination and subordination in the same sentence? Let's see if you can do it. President Carter brought the two prime ministers together for talks. They refused to speak to each other at first. They blamed each other for problems in the Middle East. All right, I'll give you a hint. How could you use a coordinating conjunction, one of the fanboys, to combine the first two sentences? That's right. President Carter brought the two prime ministers together for talks, comma, and they refused to speak to each other at first. All right, we've used coordination. Now let's use subordination. What subordinating conjunction could you use to join the third clause to the first two? That's right, because. Wow. What a cool word group this is now. We've taken a lot of ideas and packed them in the same sentence, but that's okay. Our reader can follow us easily because we've used coordination and subordination. Here's our new word group with the three clauses combined. President Carter brought the two prime ministers together for talks, and they refused to speak to each other at first because they blamed each other for problems in the Middle East. Wow, so many ideas in one sentence. But that's really what learning these advanced techniques is all about. It's all about helping you communicate difficult, complicated ideas smoothly and clearly for your reader. But it gets better. Now that you know how to create a subordinate clause, the truth is you can put a subordinate clause in the beginning, middle, or end of a sentence. Let's move the subordinate clause in this word group to the middle. Here's what we get. President Carter brought the two prime ministers together for talks, but because they blamed each other for problems in the Middle East, they refused to speak to each other at first. That's what's neat about knowing these techniques, is you can begin to experiment with your writing. Okay, got an advanced question. I'm going to put the subordinate clause first. Now, what will that change about this word group? See if you can figure it out. Because they blamed each other for problems in the Middle East, even though President Carter brought the two prime ministers together, they refused to speak to each other at first. So again, now that I know how to use subordinating conjunctions and clauses, I can move things around, create different feels and emphases. What did I change about this word group? I added an extra subordinate clause instead of the coordinating conjunction. Now, I have two subordinate clauses and one independent clause. In my practice, the error I see students make the most with subordinating conjunctions and clauses is with a semicolon. they might write a sentence something like this. Experiment results changed, semicolon, after the precipitate fully hardened. Wait a minute. Remember, both sides of a semicolon are supposed to be sentences. Is the second word group a complete thought? No, it's a subordinate clause. It is not a complete thought. Therefore, it cannot be a sentence. Sometimes students will reverse the mistake by putting the subordinating conjunction first. After the precipitate fully hardened, semicolon, experiment results changed. But that's still the same error. Remember, both sides of a semicolon or of a period need to be complete thoughts. Once you put a subordinating conjunction in, you're no longer going to have a complete thought. So the semicolon or the period would not be an appropriate choice. So now we know 4 different ways to combine sentences: coordination, semicolons, colons, and subordination. The next good step would be to review all of these, and that'll be the topic of the next video.